This is Up Close. I'm Stephen I. Weiss. In this week's episode, we'll talk about moving away from Jewish orthodoxy. He was excommunicated by ultra-Orthodox rabbis for daring to change the Passover Seder and daily prayer book. But the Judaism of Rabbi Mordecai Kaplan is quite relevant to many Jews today. Exploring his work is retired Professor Mel Scult, author of a new book, The Radical American Judaism of Mordecai M. Kaplan. But first, her story is shocking. She went from prim and proper seminary girl in a leading ultra-Orthodox family to hiring herself out as a prostitute on Craigslist. Leah Vincent's life story as an innocent young woman who left the ultra-Orthodox world says a lot about the world she left behind, but also offers a lot to condemn the world the rest of us occupy and how it treats women and those without access to opportunity. Leah Vincent's memoir is Cut Me Loose. Your book gets into what is now almost a genre of people leaving the ultra-Orthodox world and then writing about their departure. But you have a pretty different take in that you're not really writing about so much what your ultra-Orthodox upbringing was like, but more of the traumatic experiences that came from being kind of foisted upon the world without knowledge of how to engage with it.
Yeah, it's much more a story of what happened after I left, and not so much a story of an expose on the world I came from. You
gradually entered into the secular world broadly, and where you found that being an innocent woman, not really aware of what is expected and how people act, you were taken advantage of by a number of men who acted horribly. It's in many ways a story about what it's like to be a woman in this world.
Yeah, I think that's true, and there's a danger in telling the story because what happened to me in the secular world is what I had been warned would happen to me. If you go out there, people will rape you and hurt you and da-da-da, and in a way that's true, but I think that if you read the story and you reflect on it, it's very clear that what happened to me happened to some degree because I encountered bad people and bad situations, but mostly because I was very ill-equipped to deal with the real world. And not only did I not have the tools, I was actually set up to become a victim. The lifestyle I was raised in, the yeshivish community, the particular sect of that I was raised in, shapes children in a very particular way, and they expect their children to have a certain kind of life, and when that life was no longer available to me, it really led to a lot of very difficult and challenging circumstances. You're a published author, you're a graduate of Harvard's Kennedy School of Government, and you're an activist, you live in the village with a husband and child. But what was the life that was expected of you? It was vastly different. And you know, what's interesting is the differences on the outside look different, but it was a difference on the inside, like the internal person that I was supposed to be, that are so incredibly different. I expected to get married when I was 18 or 19 to somebody that my parents would do a lot of research into beforehand to make sure our families and our values matched up. I would go out with him a few times, and if it seemed like we got along with each other, we would get engaged and get married very quickly, and I would become a wife and a mother. And my whole sense of self would be so defined by what does God want from me in this moment, and how do I make my husband happy, and how do I adhere to the rules that the rabbis who guide my community are setting down, and how do I be a good mother to my ever-growing crowd of children. And what do you think it was that sparked the change from that trajectory to the trajectory that led you here today? There were a lot of steps along the way that sort of started to sever my relationship with my family and the faith they represented. And I was not somebody who was looking to leave my faith when this whole journey initially started, and I kept on clinging to the ideas I had been raised with, even though they had kept on trying to push me away. And as I got older, I started to be excluded from my father's world, and I loved him so much, and I really treasured the small relationship I had with him, and to realize like my brother-in-laws who could talk and learning were going to start to take my place, and I was moving further and further away from him. It really started to imbalance and make my sense of security in my world start to be shaky. And now, speaking about the radical American Judaism of Mordecai Kaplan, Mel Scult. So what you point out about Mordecai Kaplan is that he's got this fascinating biography in which he was excommunicated from by the ultra-Orthodox in the 1940s, and he became seen as very much this radical within the Jewish context. And yet for today's Jews, for a lot of today's Jews who are perhaps unaffiliated, perhaps semi-affiliated, you feel like his Judaism is really the answer for a great many Jews.
Most Jews are committed to what might be called a Jewish particularism, feeling that the Jews are special, feeling that we have a special mission. The chosenness is still very, very important to people. And to come out and to deny that is still very shocking to a great many people. In addition to that, Kaplan's theology, though it's very, very complicated, involves the dismissal of a supernatural deity. And I think that most Jews, even many Reformed Jews, still want to believe that in some way there's a God who hears their prayers, there's a God who is going to be concerned about them. I mean, Heschel, Abraham Joshua Heschel, is enormously popular in all sections of American Judaism, and that speaks to a very, very deep need that people have for a supernatural kind of belief.
Right, that need to believe. But at the same time, one of the funny things, since we could start with that, about the idea that he's extremely heretical with his theology, is that his idea of God is not all that different from, say, Maimonides. This figure that's going to come and change the course of your life, or respond to your prayers, or respond to your sins, and so in a lot of ways he was tapping into a very long-running thread, Maimonides, Gersonides, of major Jewish philosophy going back many centuries.
Well, Kaplan taught a course at the Jewish Theological Seminary, which he called the Philosophies of Judaism. He taught that in the 40s and 50s. And friends of mine who took that course said he presented Maimonides as a Reconstructionist, so that there is a kind of continuity. But the point is that Kaplan is into a kind of naturalism, which he's not completely a naturalist, but it's a kind of naturalism which goes against many aspects of the tradition, because in Maimonides, whatever you want to say about God, God is still the source of the law, of the halakha, and the source of the Torah. And that is not the case for Kaplan. So that there's a very, very important break, and that's why he was considered heretical.
At the same time, his school of belief is his fundamentally what he suggests we do. There's a lot of act as if, which is to say, there isn't a God. He doesn't believe that there is a God in the sense that that many traditional Jewish thinkers had thought, but act as if there is one anyway. For the most part, he doesn't suggest we act all that differently than we would if there were, and don't believe necessarily that the commandments were handed down from on high, but act pretty much as if they were. So he's on the one hand saying it's almost like for the average person who doesn't have struggles with belief and faith, they could pretty much be exactly the same Jew they were and be in Kaplan's realm.
We need to understand that Kaplan, in Judaism as a Civilization, which is another part of his radicalism, came out with the idea that the halakha is not law, but is custom and habit. And there were many people that were very, very upset with that. And one of the implications of that is that with the idea of custom, one has a choice. And so there is a very, very a large range of observance that can fit under the Kaplanian tent, if we want to talk that way.
That's all for this week's abbreviated web episode of Up Close. A reminder, you can see the full episode of Up Close on the Jewish Channel on cable, or listen to the full audio of the show as a podcast, available on iTunes and your favorite podcast player. Jewish Channel is available on cable: Time Warner Cable Channel 528, IO Optimum Channel 505, RCN Channel 268, Bright House Channel 330, Verizon Fios Channel 900, Cox Cable Channel 1, Frontier Communications, and on Comcast in the on-demand menu under Premium Channels. For more information, visit tjctv.com.